Really glad you could all join us today. We're excited to be having this conversation and sharing this information with you all today about greenwashing, green blushing, and the new bill C-59 legislation. So we have a lot of content, so I'm going to jump right in, if that's all right. And we'll just do a little bring us into the space together, and then I'll hand it off to Maren.
Sounds great. Thanks, Christy.
Yay. Thank you. Just get my screen set up. There we go. All right. We're here. Thank you all for coming. Today, we're going to talk about greenwashing and green blushing, and specifically how companies can navigate Canada's new greenwashing legislation. For those of you that don't know us, we're Decade. We're very happy to be able to share this information with you today. Before we get started, we do want to always acknowledge the land. So we're speaking to you today from Vancouver, British Columbia, and that's situated on the unceded, stolen, and never surrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. These Coast Salish people have been stewards of the land since time immemorial. And so as we approach the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada, and which is this upcoming Monday, September 30th, we really want to recognize that this acknowledgement and land acknowledgements generally are just one small but very important step towards reconciliation. As business owners, or as citizens, we have lots of opportunities to engage in reconciliation. We encourage you to look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations. And so our invitation to everyone with us today is to reflect on your own relationships with the Indigenous territories, lands that you occupy, and to consider how you can actively support Indigenous rights and sovereignty in our daily lives and work. As it's a national holiday, we're all getting paid on Monday to stay home and think about the past and the future. Or engage in some kind of activity in your community towards reconciliation. And we encourage you to spend your pay that day with Indigenous-owned businesses. That's one act of economic reconciliation. So welcome. We are Decade. We're in business because we believe this is the most important decade in human history. And we all have a part to play in leaving the world better. Specifically, our thesis is that we can leave the world better through business. And our reason for being at Decade is that we believe that every business can leave the world better than they found it. Every person deserves to feel the delight of change making, and absolutely anything is possible. Our mantra is perfect is the enemy of good. We try to really embrace this mantra. Perfect is the enemy of good. Progress, not perfection. And we have a code, and we'd like to share our code with you. And again, that first element is perfect is the enemy of good. We don't have to solve all the problems right away. We just need to get things moving. Yes, and goodbye ego. Egos kind of got us into this, and hopefully egos can, we put our egos aside, we can move through this and get out of it. Yes, and we're generative thinkers. I think the world tells us, no, you can't use business to leave the world better. We believe we can. We believe a lot of things that are seemingly impossible are possible. Don't be afraid of the shadows. This is really important when we're thinking about impact measurement and awareness and understanding, what our companies are made of and the real value we're creating. We approach that with a very generative mindset, but we also understand that sometimes we find things that make us uncomfortable and we have to fix. So don't be afraid of the shadows. Oftentimes, the most impactful things that we can do are those places that make us really uncomfortable. Change making is delightful. Don't do it alone. Do it with your team. Do it with your community. And because this is the most important decade in human history, move fast because time is of the essence. I want to just highlight my colleagues today on the call. Michelle Austin is here with us. She's our manager of impact strategy here at Decade. And also want to share, Maren is actually going to be taking us through this whole presentation today. And put a lot of love into the preparation. And she is a senior impact strategist here at Decade. So one last slide just to bring us into the agenda. And actually, Maren, maybe I'll pass this over to you.
Yeah, sure.
And then you can take us through. Oh, one thing I will say, we have a lot of content. This is very dense. So we want your questions, and we have reserved space at the end of our call for those questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat, write them down on notes, and we'll do our best to answer any questions at the end, with kind of 10, 15 minutes left at the end of the presentation. And I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
Okay, thanks, Christy. All right.
Amazing.
And I will share my sound.
Yes.
Inside joke for anyone who has attended a session with me, and I always forget to share my sound. Thank you, Christy, for the intro. Super excited to be here with you all today. I'm Maren. Like Christy said, I'm on the Decade team, and I'm going to be bringing us through our session today, focused on greenwashing, as well as the new Canadian legislation that focuses on it, and what that means for all of us today and how we can move forward. So just quickly, our agenda, we are going to start with, if anyone's been to a Decade session or in a workshop with us, we love context setting. So we'll start with a brief history of greenwashing. So where we've been in the past and where we are today. Then we'll focus on what the landscape of policy advancements and implications for businesses looks like internationally, and then as well in Canada, focusing on Bill C-59. Then we will switch gears to our solutions-oriented part of the session, focused on impact reporting. So both as a tool for risk mitigation and delightful storytelling, we'll share some tips and tricks for all of you on how to get started with this, as well as some really amazing examples we always love to share. And then lastly, just as takeaways, we will share our recommendations, next steps for those in our Decade client community, as well as all of you who've attended today. And we will reserve a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end of the session. So please feel free to put your questions or thoughts in the chat as we go along. Michelle will be monitoring that. And then, like I said, we'll have some time to go through those at the end. So starting with our brief history and a few definitions. On the slide here, we have Mark Twain. And this is a quote that we love so much. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Which is so true when it comes to greenwashing and, you know, as consumers, as folks in the world, the things that businesses and industries communicate to us, it's really hard to know what's true and to know who to trust. So today we're going to really try and just walk through how to better discern that. So just a few terms to know. I'm sure lots of you are already familiar with these, but just to level set, greenwashing itself, the process of conveying false information or impressions to mislead about how a company's products or services are environmentally or socially beneficial, often involves making unsubstantiated claims to deceive either consumers or other stakeholders into believing that a company's products or services are better than they actually are, or have a greater positive impact than they actually do. And then another piece that we do want to define, and we'll get into a little bit later, is green blushing. And so this is something that we see when companies actually intentionally downplay or conceal their sustainability or environmental initiatives. from the public or other stakeholders, and actually intentionally, choose not to share those things. And so today we'll address both these, greenwashing and green blushing, and how to avoid them and approach them within your business. So to provide a little further context on greenwashing as a concept, this is something that we love to cover in some of our other workshops as well, is this 7 deadly sins of greenwashing. So the first sin of the hidden trade-off. This is committed by suggesting that a product is green based on an unreasonably narrow set of attributes without attention paid to other important environmental issues. For example, paper as a product, not necessarily environmentally preferable just because it comes from a sustainably harvested forest, for an example. The sin of no proof, second there. This is simply committed by an environmental claim that cannot be substantiated by easily accessible supporting information or a reliable third-party certification. That's a really important one that we will focus on when it comes to the new legislation in Bill C-59. The sin of vagueness, third, they're committed by every claim that is so poorly defined or broad that its real meaning is likely to be misunderstood. For example, when we see all natural claims made by companies, that would fall into that. The sin of irrelevance. So this is committed by making an environmental claim that might be truthful, but is unimportant or unhelpful for consumers when seeking environmentally preferable products. The lesser of two evils kind of speaks for itself, but is committed by claims that might be true within the product category, but risk distracting the consumer or the kind of reader from the greater environmental impacts of the category as a whole. Organic cigarettes would be an example of that, if they exist. The sin of fibbing. So the least frequent sin is committed by making environmental claims that are just simply false. So most common examples of that are falsely claiming to be certified. So worshiping false labels. Last there, the sin of worshiping false labels is committed by a product that either through words or images gives the impression of third-party endorsement where no such endorsement actually exists. So just a little bit of context setting, we'll get into some examples that really help to contextualize what greenwashing looks like in practice, starting in the early days. So greenwashing has existed for a very long time, and we will be focusing in the next few slides on a specific industry. And so while the term greenwashing wasn't coined until later in the 20th century, oil and gas companies and the fossil fuel industry, Standard Oil is one example, in the late 1800s actually began using imagery in advertising to soften their industrial image. Specifically speaking about gasoline, which today it's kind of interesting how these companies were able to get away with things like that. In the 1930s, Shell Oil also explored environmentally focused advertising, showcasing the company, within natural environments and their logo all over it, which is quite interesting. And for a really long time as well, there's lots on this slide, but we had an example of Standard Oil on the previous slide. And when we think about greenwashing and its history, we did want to highlight today that for multiple decades, the fossil fuel industry has been perpetrating a multi-billion-dollar disinformation, propaganda, and lobbying campaign to delay climate action by confusing the public and policymakers about the climate crisis and its solutions. So this has involved a really remarkable array of advertisements with crazy headlines ranging from lies they tell our children to unsettled science and other stuff like that. And so again, this is really challenging because it puts and has put for years consumers, the public, in a tough position of, who can we trust and what information is true. So lies and misleading information like this, when it comes to voluntary reporting, which impact reporting is voluntary, and we'll talk about that later, but it does make it really challenging when it comes to decision-making for consumers. And another just contextualizing piece here with the fossil fuel industry is that at the intersection of the fossil fuel producers, climate change, and greenwashing, the fact that it is just 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of global emissions, that's a really powerful statistic. And these more or less are the same companies, the same industry that have been running these ads clouding climate denial since the 1980s, many of which now are hoping that we will forget that because they are the same companies that have recently had to take down so many of their sustainability claims from their websites as a result of the greenwashing legislation. So just wanted to contextualize that with this specific industry that we'll talk about it shortly, but the legislation that's been introduced in Canada definitely is targeted at addressing greenwashing in this specific context in the fossil fuel industry. So switching gears a little bit, we jump forward to the 1970s, 1980s. This is when we start to see, in response to greenwashing, but also just, generally, the rise of the grassroots mobilization, the first Earth Day in 1970, and the actual term greenwashing was coined in 1986 by Jay Westerveld here on the screen. And that term, greenwashing, was inspired by Jay Westerveld looking at hotel practices and the fact that they always highlight and always ask guests to reuse their towels for environmental reasons, while at the same time, the hotel industry expanding their operations, heavily emitting, having a large environmental impact, but choosing to focus on that very small kind of piece related to towel reuse. Jump forward again, 1990s, early 2000s. So the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, we saw a huge surge in environmental product claims at this time. Approximately 1/4 of all new household products advertising themselves as either recyclable, compostable, environmentally friendly. During this decade, we also saw BP, so British Petroleum, rebranded, very famous example of greenwashing, to Beyond Petroleum, despite the fact that very minimal to no investment in renewables compared to, of course, their investment in fossil fuels as a producer. And this is the era in which we really do start to see increased scrutiny and first drafting of guidelines and certifications for environmental claims. I'm sure this is an example that's familiar to many of you. We love to highlight this one. 2015, Volkswagen's emissions cheating scandal. So Volkswagen, as shown on the screen here, this is when Volkswagen got caught and that they revealed systematic cheating on carbon emissions tests. And yeah, it became one of the most significant examples of greenwashing to date. They installed defeat devices in millions of diesel-powered cars, and this advertisement was just one of many. And so, yeah, this is an example of a really, really well-known company, and they did get caught. So that inspired further kind of crackdown on greenwashing. And so enter the 2010s, significant increase in public awareness of greenwashing and corresponding corporate criticism. In addition to Dieselgate, Volkswagen happening in this decade, this is the first time that a lot of fast fashion brands start being called out for launching sustainable collections amid unbackable, unsubstantiated sustainability claims. This is also the same decade. Just wanted to highlight that the Deepwater Horizon disaster happened, which was shortly after British Petroleum rebranded to Beyond Petroleum. So a little bit of irony there. And this is also when we start to see the rise of green blushing, which at the end of the day is fair, because at this point, so many things have happened that would potentially instill fear for companies to make claims. And when they're not, quite sure how to substantiate those, maybe it feels safer to stay silent rather than come out and share about the things that they're doing socially or environmentally. Today, 2020s, now, especially in Canada, we are seeing really, really large and significant complaints filed against big actors, including banks, large corporations, and lawsuits over greenwashing. And as well, we are seeing increasingly stricter legislation to mitigate greenwashing and require transparent reporting, which is what we're going to get into when we talk about Bill C-59. We're also seeing, and this is a part of Bill C-59 as well, but consumers and environmental activist groups demanding action and coming out and standing tall and really criticizing what a lot of these companies have been doing for many years. And so another example of this is in the last few years, Standard asking Canada's competition tribunal to scrutinize further Lululemon and some of the claims that they make about environmental impact in their supply chain, as well as labor practices. So there's so many examples that we could share, but really the takeaway is that greenwashing has been happening for a very, very long time, and we are finally seeing Government of Canada, as well as civil society and consumers generally wanting to demand better, and that there are finally kind of real consequences for this. And green blushing, we actually don't have any examples of this because the green blushers stay silent. And so these are companies that don't share the positive impact that they're creating through their products, services, or business model. And these are the shy guys. So we'll talk a little bit later about some antidotes to this and how to stride that middle line between greenwashing and green blushing and transparent reporting, which is the solution, but don't be a green blusher. So we want all of you who are impactful out there to share where you're at in your impact journey and the amazing things you're doing in one way or another. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit from the history of green blushing and bring us forward to today and what the landscape of policy and legislation looks like in the specific context when it comes to reporting on sustainability and claims made by corporations or other entities. I will go through these fairly quickly. I won't speak to each thing on the slide, but internationally in the last few years, there have been more introductions to climate disclosures required. Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure has been around for a while, but it is being kind of rolled out more frequently. The EU has had regulations around due diligence for environmental impact and human rights for many years. And the West is now kind of starting to catch up with the regulations that are being introduced, one of which through Bill C-59. In Canada, corporate diversity reporting is also being mandated and introduced on a voluntary basis by many companies. We've also seen Bill S-211, which is the Act on Modern Slavery, introduced a year or two ago for supply chain reporting as well, and many other kind of frameworks and fund disclosures, some specific to large kind of emitting industries, some specific to the financial industry. But generally, we are seeing this rise in kind of policy specific to sustainability related impacts and operations of businesses. And so before we get into speaking about the specific legislation, Bill C-59 that brought us together today, we do want to just share a little clip of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, which is powerful. So I'm going to play this video.
This next speaker, the Secretary General of the United Nations, we sat together on the 11th of December 2019 on that podium where we waited for Luca Pamitano, the astronaut, to join the screen. I was the moderator. He joined from space. And I was imagining, what does he feel when he sees two eyes of storms brewing from above the earth, the place he calls home? And as you sat there, Secretary General, you reflected on why it matters, the urgency of our time. You just came back recently where you saw the ice sheets melting. Thank you for your leadership for early warning for all, because we needed that leadership. Your effort is what has been needed. Please tell us why this matters so much now more than ever.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends. Before I begin, allow me to say a quick word about the announcement yesterday from several members of the oil and gas industry, as this is the first public occasion in which I can do it. The fossil fuel industry, the giant behind the climate crisis, is finally starting to wake up. But the promises made clearly fall short of what is required. The commitment on the elimination of methane by 2030 is a step in the right direction. But the announcement to achieve net zero by 2050 says nothing about eliminating emissions from fossil fuel consumption, the so-called Scope 3. Science is clear. We need to phase out fossil fuels within a time frame compatible with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In addition, yesterday's announcement provided no clarity on the pathway to reaching net zero by 2050, which is absolutely essential to ensure integrity. There must be no room for greenwashing.
And that's what we wanted to share from that little clip. And Antonio goes on to speak for many, many minutes on a lot of these important topics related to climate action and the urgency of businesses, entities, governments worldwide to act now. But I love that anecdote he just gave about fossil fuel companies and greenwashing tied really well into framing this legislation in Canada that has been introduced as of this year. So Bill C-59, the new Canadian greenwashing legislation, as some are calling it, and some articles online are speaking to it about, it does reflect amended sections of Canada's Competition Act. It received royal assent on June 20th, 2024. So it's been in place now for a few months. And so essentially the provisions in the bill, what this means is that there are increased requirements for businesses, corporations, when it comes to the claims they make related to sustainability, socially and environmentally. So those new provisions, we'll highlight a few of these pieces today in the webinar. I will also say, as a caveat, at Decade, we're experts in sustainability advisory for businesses, as well as supporting companies through B Corp certification and many other things as well. We are not experts from a legal perspective with respect to the changes to the Competition Act. And as I'll highlight on this slide, there are a few areas that require further clarity from Canada's Competition Bureau and the Competition Tribunal on Bill C-59 specifically. So happy to discuss questions at the end of this, but we do just want to give you a little insight into our understanding of what this legislation really means. So just to highlight the three kind of main changes that have to do with getting the greenwashers out of here. The first is that now adequate and proper testing requirements have been introduced for any environmental claim or benefit of product or service. And so any claim made must be substantiated through reliable and scientifically acceptable methods. If you are going to make a claim related to something environmental or social related to your business impact, companies should be prepared to provide transparent documentation of how things were tested, what data was collected, the analysis performed, and conclusions drawn. So that's the first piece. The second is alignment with international standards. So as read in the bill, to ensure uniformity and reliability, any environmental or social claim or benefit must align with or conform with an internationally recognized standard. This is a specific area that, when it comes to, well, which internationally recognized standards are allowed here, further clarity is needed from Canada's Competition Bureau and Competition Tribunal. There has not been a case law example of this bill being brought forward in Canada's Supreme Court or other courts as well. And so we'll give a few examples of, from our perspective, some credible and really strong international standards that we would recommend to kind of map and align your sustainability claims with. But that's one of the pieces in the bill. And then the last one as well is private rights of action. So in simple terms, the bill now permits and allows individuals, environmental advocacy groups, and other kind of passionate folks to bring forward greenwashing claims directly to the competition tribunal, which will just further accelerate the opportunity for companies to really be kind of brought to the stand and consequenced where appropriate. So just quickly to highlight from our perspective and our expertise, some of the more well-known internationally recognized methodologies for mapping social and environmental impacts of your business. So we have the ISO standards, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Science-Based Targets Initiative, Global Reporting Initiative, so GRI, Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, and a few other kind of third-party certifications here, including B Corp certification. We'll get into a few of these a little bit more later. But yeah, when it comes to internationally recognized methodologies, this is the guidance we would give at this time. There is further information, further clarity required from the government on what ones are truly recognized, but from our expertise today, this is what we would offer. So as I said before, the bill did receive royal assent in June of this year. That means that it is real and kind of acting today here in September. So when it comes to who needs to comply with the requirements in this bill, any business of all sizes making any kind of benefit claims, either environmentally, socially, need to be acting in compliance with Bill C-59. One thing I will say specifically, and I'll talk to this on the next few slides, is that this bill and the provisions in it are, read between the lines, are definitely specifically there to focus on reducing the amount of greenwashing claims made by heavily emitting industries, including fossil fuel producers. So they are particularly focused on carbon emissions reduction, sustainable sourcing and production, waste reduction, and energy efficiency. And when it comes to legal and financial repercussions for non-compliance, just quickly here, we'll say, again, when it comes to fines and penalties and companies or industries being brought forward to have these consequences implemented, the focus from our understanding will be first, of course, on these very heavily emitting industries that are having a large impact on the environment and society in a negative way. So companies that fail to meet these substantiation requirements of any claims that they're making, the first instance, either $10 million or 3% of annual worldwide gross revenues, whichever is larger. Those are the penalties for the first offense, and then for subsequent offenses, penalties can be as large as 15 million, or again, 3% of annual worldwide gross revenues. For individuals with these claims, the penalties can be greater than $750,000 Canadian, or $1 million for each subsequent order as well, and same, whatever's larger, 3% of annual worldwide gross revenues. So when it comes to who is really first facing these repercussions and consequences, from what we've seen, fossil fuel giants are already feeling it. And so many of you, I'm sure, have heard Pathways Alliance, largest coalition of major oil sands companies in Canada, has already taken down all of their public claims related to sustainability online. And so a lot of this has come with criticism of the legislation, saying that these things being implemented by the government are silencing them. But at the end of the day, we see many environmental and health organizations, as well as the government, welcoming Bill C-59's passage into law and really backing it up. And so while there are still aspects that require clarity from the government around what does the legislation mean and what are some of those internationally recognized methodologies that we can lean on for mapping our business impacts, the short-term impacts of this bill are already clear. And so it's really great to see that, this is something the government has acted on. It's been passed through, and, we're looking forward to seeing where it goes. And one other thing that I will just mention as well here before we get into our impact reporting section is that all reporting, especially in Canada, when it comes to environmental and social claims, still remains voluntary. And so the reason why oil and gas companies could just pull all of this information down from their websites, like that, is that it was voluntary at the end of the day for them to have it on their websites. And so Bill C-59 is the first time we are seeing legislation with real teeth to be able to put a stop to misinformation and false truth telling to consumers and the world by greenwashers. So the antidotes to greenwashing, green blushing, many of this is underpinned by impact reporting, which we'll get to in a few slides. But we do like to just share these kind of quick tips as well to consider when just engaging in your day-to-day business operations. So starting with the truth, green claims or social claims shouldn't start in the marketing department. Before spinning a better story, build positive practices in your business from the inside out. Data is so important. Verifiable claims and real metrics is a part of what Bill C-59 is requiring businesses to have for now. And so if you have numbers to be able to speak to, that's really important. Making your claims material and right-sized, so not overemphasizing on one green attribute if your more significant areas of business don't follow suit. Transparency being key, that is an absolutely huge one. We have some great examples of companies who have been engaging in impact reporting for a long time, and transparency, for better or for worse, has really helped grow their businesses. Again, engaging your stakeholders, so continuing to be kind of an active corporate citizen and engaging actor with your consumers, with your team, with the community, environmental stakeholders as well. And then lastly, seeking third-party verification. So this is a really important one. I know many companies in the room today, business owners, do have third-party verification at the level of their company or are kind of interested in it. So we see that one as a very important antidote to greenwashing. And all of these antidotes are underpinning of trust and the idea of building trust with your consumers, the users of your products and service, your team, the community, and everyone who interacts with your business. Antidotes to greenwashing are very similar. And the only real difference I would say is that you got to just start. And so our hope today is that for those of you who might feel like you're in the space of wanting to share more about the impact story of your business and that you are doing really great things, but maybe need a little bit more guidance on how to share some of those claims and feel strong about them. That's what we're going to get into now and talk about impact reporting and some best practices there. So impact reporting, this is now, we have arrived at the solutions-oriented part of this webinar. We hope that the covering off of the history of greenwashing and the implications and kind of overview of Bill C-59 were really full of good key takeaways for all of you. And looking forward to the question and answer period later. But something that we did really want to focus on in the session is knowing what Bill C-59 means for all of us. And as business owners, how can we immediately start understanding how to not just comply with this legislation and explore risk mitigation, but also really engage in delightful storytelling at the same time about our unique kind of impact we're having on the world and our businesses. So through impact reporting, that's possible. This is something that we feel very passionate about at Decade. It's something that we get a lot of joy out of in supporting companies through. And a quote that we really, really love from Joseph Campbell is, "People forget facts, but they remember stories." Every brand communication that you have through your business is an opportunity to report on impact. Stories are always. And so the time is now for us to live into those stories and give people a reason to believe in something. just like Antonio Guterres was saying, is that the urgency is unbelievable right now with what's happening in the world. And so the time is now. This is your call to action to tell your story to the world. Impact reporting, this is something that we want to have you embrace through all of the channels of communications within your business. And like I said on the last slide, this is also the call to action to do something and communicate something. When brands don't have anything to say or, not communicating anything related to impact, it's likely because they aren't doing anything inspiring or worth talking about. And so all of you in the room can say differently as impact businesses. And so we want to be able to support you in knowing where to start with that. So some best practices for effective impact reporting, and maybe some of you in the room have explored impact reporting before, especially those of you who are B Corp certified and maybe haven't specifically done impact reporting. You have so much of what you already need. Even those of you who might just have other third-party impact certifications. So where to start? Communicating your unique mission, vision, and values to level set. And then, as we talked about with Bill C-59, describing the way that you impact the world socially or environmentally with specific and verifiable claims. So those metrics and data pieces that you're measuring within your business, whether it's to report for your B Corp certification or just, for other things on an annual or biannual quarterly basis, those metrics are incredibly powerful. And we will show some examples of some really great impact reports for famous impact companies that are really leveraging those metrics to communicate the positive impact they're having on the world. We'll also show some examples of companies sharing their goals with truthful and measurable progress. So something important to mention is that, Bill C-59 doesn't necessarily mean that companies aren't allowed now to share their goals or ambitions that they have around emissions targets or changes they want to make within their supply chain and stuff like that. But they do just want to see that these goals and claims are substantiated with measurable indicators and progress and truthful storytelling around how your company is going to get there and where you've gotten to date. So the first example I'll share, which I'm sure many of you are really familiar with, is Dr. Bronner's. They are an iconic impact company. They have a legacy stretching from the 1940s all the way to today. Their bottles adorned with very unique philosophical kind of manifestos preach everything about the impact story of the company, which is amazing. And when it comes to their impact reporting, in 2017, they released this very metrics and graph and visual kind of focused heavy that is reflective of their manifesto that is delivered on their bottle designs, which is really interesting. And so the next few slides here, just another few screenshots of what their impact reports have looked like to date, really highlighting the importance of these metrics. Numbers tell an amazing story as well. And when it comes to what's required to substantiate environmental or social claims, metrics are a really, really good way to do that. So another example when it comes to more social claims and Dr. Bronner's response to the Black Lives Matter movement in the 2020s as well. The text is a little bit small, but they did leverage their impact report to communicate and tell their own powerful story about what this means for their business and how they're going to go about addressing it and moving forward as well. Another quick example here, just from a visual perspective, all of you impact companies in the room have your own brand language and colors and fonts and unique way of showing up in the world. And so the impact report is another way for you to create something beautiful that your users, potential future team members, consumers can engage with and learn more about your business. So this is another, I think maybe from the last few years, Dr. Bronner's impact report. One other example I'll show, which we love so much, is Patagonia. And so Patagonia has been around for a long time, another kind of iconic impact company. Old dirtbag climber takes on the climbing industry to create better products, fights the haters and evangelicals, tells the world not to buy his stuff, they do anyway, sues the president of the United States, and then gives away $1 billion. Pretty crazy story. Yvon Chouinard is up there in terms of decade icons and folks that we look up to. But one important example I do want to share about Patagonia is that these are some screenshots of statistics, metrics similar to Dr. Brunner's that they've shared in their impact report. But in 2020, they found themselves at the center of a little bit of a controversy when they openly shared information about how in an internal audit of some of their vendors overseas, the labor conditions weren't up to the standards that, maybe they had been claiming before that they were aware of. And so they openly communicated in a transparent way about what they were going to do about it. And that actually led in that year to a 25% increase in sales. And so by openly, correlation causation, it's a great example of how a company confronted and addressed its shortcomings and built trust with its customers. And hopefully is inspiring other companies to do the same as well. So yeah, that's kind of just the short and sweet on the impact reports that we love. We do want to leave time for questions and answers, but I'll just share a few kind of key recommendations and next steps before we get into that as well. So start your impact reporting. That's where we want to leave all of you from the session today going forward. Especially if you're a B Corp or you're looking into B Corp certification or other kind of impact frameworks, you have so much of what's required and what substantiates a really, really strong impact report through the metrics that you need to be tracking to report, and just by having a defined kind of mission and vision and values that you hold really close. When it comes to setting those metrics, they are the proof points to your commitments. They are the key aspects of what Bill C-59, but also so many of us are looking for when it comes to substantiation of these environmental and social claims. So when deciding what metrics to measure or to set, think about what makes you as an impact business, and what are the things that you're really proud of that you want to be able to share progress on, what's important for your audience, and what do you want to be held accountable for. So when it comes to some of these impact measurement frameworks, especially B Corp certification at Decade, we do have expertise in supporting companies through measuring their impacts of their business through B Corp, the UN SDGs, Just Label, Living Wage Certified, and a few of these other ones on the screen there as well. So we're always around to talk through impact reporting and support businesses as well. And hopefully we can answer some of your questions in the Q&A period as well. So lastly, this is Joseph Campbell on the screen, and I'll just repeat that quote again to leave us all with, is that people forget facts, but they remember stories. Impact reporting is real talk, and sharing your impact story, whether that's celebrating wins, setbacks, progress that you've made, no matter how large or how small, is really, really important. And so we encourage all of you to maybe even identify your alignment with a trusted impact framework like B Corp certification, UN SDGs, and start kind of deciding what are those meaningful metrics that we want to share publicly, and just embrace that kind of mindset of the fact that clarity is kindness, and transparency and honesty with all of those who your business impacts really builds trust. So that's what we want to leave you with today. We do want to save some time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Michelle and Christy, I think, have been monitoring the chat throughout the session. So maybe I'll pass it off to one of you if you want to open up questions.
Sure. Maybe I'll just say there's been a couple good questions in the chat that Christy has shared and answered. A question related to the definition of impact reporting and what the difference is between that and ESG and sustainability report. So the answer is there if you're wondering, as well as another question around how a company determines what qualifies as material impact, which Christy has also answered. If folks have other questions, feel free to just come off mic and ask,
Mhm.
or write it in the chat.
Yeah.
Christy, if you want to build off what you've written.
Yeah, I think that question, the initial question we got, what is the definition of impact reporting and how is it different from ESG and sustainability reports? We use the terms interchangeably. I do think there is a difference between compliance reports and voluntary reports, though. So publicly traded companies, they have, a much higher threshold for, they have to meet particular kind of annual reporting requirements in a way that I'm sure all the companies in this room don't have to. And so when we think about the reporting work we do for companies, it's very much about voluntary reporting and, building that kind of like source of truth and communicating, moving beyond the green blushing. Happy to answer other questions. I feel like there's all these nice boxes on the screen. Sammy, thank you for your question. So if you're certified by one of the internationally recognized methodology, you'd be deemed safe by law for now. Yes. I think that, with various different certifications, we're very familiar with the B Corp process and the threshold of documentation and evidence, the evidence that's required to secure that particular certification. And so the onus, the kind of threshold of evidence is really high. And I do think that there's opportunities in these certifications to kind of build out your own methodology, use their methodology and like kind of build upon that for your own companies.
And maybe I would also add to that of what particularly you're leaning on the methodology for. Like if you're saying, we make the most sustainable t-shirts in the world, I can say that because I'm B Corp certified. Your methodology, that's probably not enough to say because I'm B Corp, I can make this claim about my t-shirt. You would need to have an organic certification, a fair trade certification associated with that t-shirt. So I think it's very claim specific of how you use certifications to back what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly, Michelle.
I think one thing, oh, sorry, go ahead, Maren.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, to call back to that point we made about that piece in the legislation around internationally recognized methodologies, it is still unclear as to which exact standards internationally are recognized by Canada's Competition Tribunal. And so because the legislation is fairly new, there hasn't been any publicly released kind of case law examples of it being challenged in court or anything like that. I would say, like Christy said, like, yes, and Michelle said as well, the specific claims you're making, it's important to ensure that those are mapped directly to whatever kind of internationally recognized standard that you're using. Just by being B Corp certified or just by, saying that we use this methodology doesn't allow for you to just make claims about anything you want. It's like the specificity in the relationship there.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's useful.
Yeah. Thanks, Maren. I think just to add a little more about that methodology, one of the reasons that we use the B Corp assessment as a foundational tool at Decade is that unlike many other frameworks, it measures everything against, there's basically two ways or three ways. There's revenue and expenses. Like how does this show up? How does that these impact business models can be categorized? And you can understand either how does impact show up based on your revenue and expenses? You can also understand, like, create a methodology for measuring the outcomes your products have on humans, animals, the environment. And and then there's the corporate structure. And so I feel like, you know, and we can't go down the rabbit hole of impact business models today, but I feel like those impact business models kind of give you the tools you need to understand, you know, how to verify impact, and then how to effectively kind of communicate it if you just take it one step further. We have 3 minutes left. Sammy.
Super helpful.
Thanks, Sammy.
Any other questions? Happy to answer questions. Also happy to give you 2 minutes back in your day. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put together a kind of a follow-up in a couple weeks. We'll send out the recording. We'll also put it on our website. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Ramston. Thanks, Sammy. And so we will kind of follow up with you. Thanks, Kate. We're always happy to chat with you about what impact looks like in your business, how to really do that measurement piece and build the systems to create more impact in your business. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.